I think even in her first term, she delivered like a seasoned legislator. If you want something done, call on Senator Favola. She, in particular, her services to children and domestic violence and foster care issues, and she delivers on those. And she's on the right committees, the Rehabilitation and Social Service Committee. And she is, you heard Deborah talk about the need for an increase in TANF. She is the one that got the 2 increases. What Deborah didn't say, what Deborah didn't say is that the first increase was after 15 years without an increase. Imagine if the Social Security recipients hadn't gotten a increase in 15 years. But when we called on her to do it, she got the job done. She's that kind of person. And she serves on the Commission on Youth. And they have a subcommittee on TANF, and that's due to her good work, getting them to set up a subcommittee on TANF. And they reported their results yesterday or the day before?
A few days ago.
Few days ago. And we wrote extensive comments on their recommendations, so we're eager to hear from her how that all came out, how it shakes out. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, John. You gave me a much longer introduction than probably I deserved, which is why I was standing up so quickly. But thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here and to work with all of you. You are so effective advocating for our most vulnerable residents, and I just want to thank you in advance. Your ideas are great, but you really put your muscle where your heart is, and that's sometimes unusual. So kudos to you. I am the vice chair of the Commission on Youth, but I put a bill in that actually required a study to be done, how TANF dollars were to be allocated. You know, TANF is a block grant. It stands for Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. The state of Virginia gets $158 million a year. We spend about $80 million on direct services to TANF recipients. And then we shift another $34 million to support some block grant programs like the Social Services Block Grant Program. And then we also have this other category that we fund, which we call them the Category 3 and 4 programs. They are related, let me put it this way, they help our low-income populations, but they don't necessarily directly help TANF folks. TANF folks may access the programs. It'd be something like resource mothers or domestic violence programs. So certainly our TANF residents would be able to access the programs, but they're not specifically targeted to them, and $22 million goes to those programs. So my committee sat down and looked at the total expenditure package for TANF dollars and tried to come up with a better path for ensuring that the dollars were used more wisely, directly supported TANF clients, so we would have better outcomes. So our TANF clients, in effect, would transition to a self-sufficient life, be able to support their children, and not have any relapses. So this is what we came up with. The Commission on Youth actually will determine what recommendations they will support at the October 20th meeting, which is next week. So you all are commenting on a draft set of comments that my subcommittee offered to the Commission. So one of the first things, again, if we want to help folks become self-sufficient, if we want to really ensure that they can move forward, we want to first ensure that they had good housing. So our subcommittee is looking into whether or not local governments can move TANF recipients to the top of the line when we're talking about Section 8 housing vouchers. Now some jurisdictions are saying, well, yeah, they sort of already do it, and other jurisdictions are like, well, we'd like to really know more about this. So, so that's a recommendation that we're looking into, and of course that recommendation technically reads that we would go to the Virginia Department, the Virginia Housing Authority, and see what kind of policies that are out there that could either facilitate what I just said or would inhibit it. We want to ensure that access to child care for TANF families and for those transitioning into the workforce is absolutely available. You know, child care is critical, and in some of our low-income families, they're spending as much as 25% of their income on child care, and that is simply too much. They have a very low income to begin with, and then you have to pay for housing and other services. So some of our recommendations in that area would be to support the Virginia Department of Social Services efforts to include a component within the Virginia case management system that allows for a seamless transition of TANF child care from one jurisdiction to another if, in fact, a TANF recipient moved. I want to introduce a budget amendment to increase funds for child care subsidies for the working poor. We want to support continued efforts to provide market-based subsidies, again, for vulnerable families. So this is going to cost some money. I mean, that's just the bottom line. But if you don't invest now, families never make it to the point where they're self-sufficient and they can, in fact, care for their children in a way that will enable their children to flourish and grow and go on to college and have a great life. So I don't know which recommendations my commission will adopt, but we will give your comments very serious consideration. And then we also have a recommendation. Virginia's VIEW recipients, which would be the recipients participating in our work program, we want them to receive a comprehensive array of support and transitional services. And what we're trying to do essentially is we want to extend the period of time that individuals receive our transitional support programs. Right now it's a year. We want to move it to at least 18 months. We would be very happy if it were moved to 2 years, but that's a budget issue. One of the policy questions then becomes, would everybody on that VIEW caseload be moved to a more generous transition package, or would we have to select folks that maybe were in greater need for a more generous transition package? I don't know what we'll end up doing, but those were the debates, and our recommendations sort of hang around that. Okay, I'm on 6 already. We do have a recommendation that talks about a greater use of sharing data, which we think might, this is among agencies, which we think might enable caseworkers to provide more comprehensive services. The dollars that go to a TANF family, you know, it's very low. A TANF family receives on average, it's usually a mother with 2 children, and it's about $300 a month. But there is an adjustment based on your housing category. So we are asking that the regions that are identified in the different housing categories that affect the TANF payment be re-examined. There's an effort to, this is our way of sort of moving up a TANF payment, especially for those families living in high income areas. So we worded it very carefully, but that's the intent of the recommendation, and that in effect will be the outcome if we adopt it. And what else do I have to tell you? That essentially is sort of where we're going. You know, remember so it was housing, it was ensuring that we had enough transitional services and maybe extending those transitional services. And then of course it was getting into child care subsidies and ensuring that our TANF families really had adequate child care subsidies. And finally, we're trying to do a back-end adjustment with the actual dollars that our TANF families would be eligible to receive. So it's time. One of the criticisms we've heard is, well, Senator, if we continue to fund all of the programs we are funding and the TANF recipients at the current level, we would be in a deficit in 2019. But the fact is that the TANF caseload has been dropping rather sharply in the last, John is telling me 200 a month, in the last 10 or 15 years it's dropped significantly. And my comment is, again, we have to first focus on the mission that the TANF dollars were intended to address. And if we have to readjust these categories that are the third or fourth categories that I call them, and maybe reduce funding there to shift it to direct services to TANF residents, then perhaps we should do that. So without further ado, I'm happy to take questions later. I think I kept to my time frame, but again, I can't thank you enough for everything you do.